Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit HFY called Clintstone Chapter 25 Broken, written by some guy named Ted. A faint, bloody wheezing filled the hallway, a sound all too familiar on the battlefield. A wet, gasping served as the Reaper's herald. A bitter rasping, a harsh struggle for the last breath of air before the eternal darkness. Rattling out of the body too damaged to live. Indeed, too damaged to still be living. But the noise still came. A struggle against fate, against inescapable truth. A soul that refused to enter the long night. A spirit that yet to be done with this world. But fate cannot be denied, nor can the utter desolation of the body be ignored. The rasping, the rattling breath proved to be the last. It sputtered a flame moment before the fuel was expanded. The rattling faded to gurgles, pushing through the blood and ruined tissue, forcing out through the wreckage of once being a living being. The gurgles faded to silence. Death had visited the tent taken he's chosen. Bormai stepped over the dying swarm whose breath rattled filled the hallway. It was no surprise that he was dying, seeing as the swarm had a hole punched through his chest as his arm turned off. Glancing around, Bor could see that not a single swarm body was intact. 30-odd dead or dying swarm, and not one of them was whole. Some remained indefiable, was swarm. Some. "I've never seen anything like this," Louth muttered under his breath. "Gerskuk It looks like they were fed through a meat grinder." Bor had to agree. The scene before him was something out of the mind of a twisted madman. Twisted and crushed bodies lay strewn along the floor and the walls, tossed about as if by a windstorm. Unfortunately, it was not the first one of its kind Bor had seen today. In the hallway behind him lay yet more bodies, not as damaged as these, but greater in multitude. "He just keeps getting worse," Bor intoned flatly. "First it was the ships, then the camp, and now he's hell-bent on destroying the space station single-handedly." "If anyone could do it, it'd be Clintstone," Louth replied. Bor grunted in reply, not wanting to open his mouth. He feared if he kept it open too long he might vomit. As the pair made their way down the hallway, following the trail of blood and death, the smells and sights became nearly overpowering. When a body was torn in half, the intestines were exposed to the air, and whatever is in them at that time of the owner's death gets released into the outside world. There were many such bodies shredded beyond recognition. Faintly, the din of combat could be heard in the distance. Not the sound of combat, Bor thought to himself, the sound of a massacre. Screams, plasma shots, and a dull thumping could be heard echoing down the metal tube that passed as the station hallway. Over it all, Bor could make out the low roaring, a tortured cry, filled with equal parts of sorrow and rage. "Remind me how we got stuck on cleanup detail?" Louth asked bitterly. "I was with him with Lemuria on the ship that we went to." The Gurk, hardened mercenary and veteran of hundreds of engagements, shuddered at the memory. "After that, you'd think I'd get off the duty for life." Bor could still recall the image of the bandits returning from that mission, not a scratch on them, but every one of them had wide eyes and many did not speak for a long while. No one would share what happened on that ship either. The story would likely die with them. "I don't know," he shrugged. "I guess because he listens to us the best?" Louth groaned, "as much as he listens to anyone. Damn near catatonic when he isn't. Well." The walls were painted with the evidence of that well. Looking at to change the subject, Bor said, "It's been nearly 3 weeks, and he still hasn't visited him. You'd think he'd want to, I don't know, see him at least." Louth shook his head. "You can't fathom how his mind works. He is different than all of us." Bor disagreed. "He may be a different species, but he's still a living being. We all function more or less the same. He keeps this up and he's going to self-destruct." A dark chuckle, Louth shook his head and replied, "He's already self-destructed. I've never seen anyone who went into a revenge-fueled rampage survive. Rolling his shoulders, Louth continued. What we're doing at this point, and I mean the bandits, not just you and me, is ensuring that his last few days mean something. To say Boar was shocked would be like saying the space was cold. It was an understatement of epic proportions. You mean you're not going to give him that try to help him? Clint just lost his best friend, and you're going to just channel his rage into a weapon for a few days. And if he dies, it won't matter. Look, I want to help him as much as you do, but there's nothing that we can do. Louth turned to slit pupils towards Boar. The man is gone. He was already cracked up. Louth tapped the temple with a scaled finger, and now he's broken. I've seen it happen enough times in my... A moan filled the hallway. Coming from the shadowed doorway, the form of a swarm soldier was barely visible, propped up against the frame. Both legs were missing above the knee, and a pool of blood was flowing into the hallway, where it collected under another body. Looks like he missed one, Louth said, voice gentle. Boar could see that the swarm was past saving, but it would take a few minutes for death to arrive. As he watched, the injured soldier noticed the two bandits and reached for his sidearm, fingers fumbling weakly for the grip. Boar placed a foot against the weapon, preventing it from drawing it. The blood-covered being stopped struggling almost immediately. It didn't look like he had much fight left in him. The swarm's mouth moved open, but his voice was too low for Boar to hear. He leaned closer, putting an ear against the gasping mouth. What was that thing? He tore through us like a paper. His voice rattled through his ruined body as he spoke, jarring his words. Boar looked at the swarm. He is what happens when you swarm think you own the galaxy. He is the vengeance of billions of slaughtered souls, and he is the one who will bring down an empire. The swarm closed his eyes. So be it. Louth spoke up. You will not live much longer, soldier. Do you wish for mercy? The swarm grimaced and shrugged his shoulders as much as he could before nodding. Boar stepped back, and Louth placed a single bolt between the swarm's head. A mercy for the fatally wounded soldier. The pair walked in silence for a minute after that, following the carnage leading deeper into the station. I refuse to believe his mind is so broken that we can't help, Boar said abruptly. Sighing, Louth said, even if we could, we can't. What the hell are we going to say to him? Sorry everything that you ever loved was taken away by the swarm. Louth stopped in his tracks and looked at Boar. Everything he loved was taken by the swarm. His entire race was eradicated by the Empire. There is nothing left for him but to fight. No. Louth put up a hand. Don't mention the galaxy or free beings or loftier ideals. Clint didn't even know the rest of us existed 5 years ago. No one can fight for something they never knew existed. Not enough to keep them going through the darkest times. Even you and I wouldn't last with only the galaxy to fight for. We fight for our families, for our planets, for our species. It's biology deep in here. He tapped his skull again. Is a little itching urge to say is survive and thrive. We may not do either of those things, but we can scratch that itch by ensuring that at least our species continues. Clint can't even do that. All he had was a notion of the galaxy and those closest to him. Well, now he doesn't even have that. His lover is likely dead, and his best friend, the one pulled him back from the brink who knows how many times, is lying in a coma, from which no one expects him to recover. Boar had nothing to say to that. It certainly seemed like Clint had given up on life. Ever since TEDx had been broken, Clint had remained silent and still throughout the days. He didn't speak, he didn't eat, he simply sat and stared at whatever was nearest. He ate when prompted, though. Boar was responsible to seeing for that. The only time Clint looked alive was when he was killing Swarm. He had remained in his near catatonic state until reports of the Swarm ship came in, and a team assembled to attack. Clint vehemently insisted that he would go, and no one had argued. After that, he started looking for things to kill. The bandits found Swarm to point him at. Then the news had come. During a routine diplomatic mission, Lady Knight's ship had gone missing in a pirate space that she was presumed dead. The one who had relayed that, the gem Mufeni, had not known Teddix was near dead himself. That pushed Clint over the edge. He had left immediately for the ship, and only Boar and Louth had caught up with him before he left. Now Clint was currently dismantling the Swarm War Station with his bare hands. "You don't know Teddix won't recover. You didn't see the things I saw." "No, I didn't," Louth said, "but the mere fact that Teddix survived was a miracle that had to be used up all of the luck and karma, whatever you want to call it, if Teddix ever had. And I saw what he looked like afterwards. He's not getting better." Boar shook his head. He didn't think anyone would understand. Teddix hadn't survived. He'd been saved. He still didn't believe it himself. He had been a foot crushed in Jahan's chest. He had stood there as Teddix died. And then the impossible happened. Boar stood frozen in shock. Teddix Jakku was dead, slain by an Urg. The Jahan that fights had been laid low, his chest destroyed. Only when a pair of Urg turned to face the surviving bandits did Boar come out of his shock. Too angry to even yell, Boar leapt forward to meet them, plasma pouring from his rifle. It did not matter that the plasma could not harm the Urg. Boar intended to fire until the energy cell was empty. Before he could reach the Urg, a sound filled the ship. It was almost a physical thing permeating everything. It was a roar of sorrow and rage, a sound full of emotion. It was a promise of immediate and utter death. Boar was knocked to the side as the figure rushed past him. An arrow shot at the Urg. For a moment, Boar was convinced Clint Stone had somehow sensed the death of his best friend, his partner in all but love, and managed to cross the entirety of the ship in the span of seconds in order to extract swift and terrible justice upon his killers. But that was impossible, even for Clint Stone. No, the being who roared with hatred and grief loud enough to destroy the planet was the slight arithmetic with the name of Merlek Wesk. Boar watched with shock nearly as great as that he felt of the death of Teddix as the medic charged recklessly into the leading Urg and tore off his arm. Swinging that arm like a club, Mylak knocked the Urg back and slept onto his back. With a quick jerk, the small Haraith wrenched the Urg's head to the side, breaking his neck. As the giant fell, Mylak was already in motion, flying towards the Urg that had killed Teddix. He impacted, and blood flew. When the red mist cleared, what was left of the Urg lay on the floor, and Mylak was kneeling next to Teddix, his hands pressed on the ruins of the Jahan's chest. Boar rushed to Teddix's side to find the medic simply sitting there, eyes closed. "What are you doing?" Boar shouted. "Help him!" He didn't know if it was possible to help someone so far gone, but the medic was the only chance that Teddix had. "I am trying," the medic replied through clenched teeth. Boar looked more closely and saw that the medic's hands had molded into Teddix's chest. Not only that, but the flesh was writhing under Mylak's touch, twisting and snapping around. "What?" Boar yelped as the medic looked up to him. "Be quiet," he hissed. "I'm trying to save his life." Staring at Teddix, Boar watched in fascinated horror as the flesh coiled and bone crunched and jerked. Slowly, the flattened and mashed-up pulp that had been a chest reformed into a rough semblance of a chest, and indeed it rose and fell and was filled with air. What the hell was that?" Boar asked after finding his voice. You just brought him back to life." "No," Mylak said. He sounded utterly exhausted, his words slurring together. "I simply reconstructed his lungs and heart. There is a good chance that he will still die, and even after that there is no guarantee that he will recover beyond this half-life." "And how did you do this? I've never heard of anything that could do what you just did." The medic chuckled, a dry chuckle that sounded almost like a cough. "I've got a little advantage over everyone else." He pushed himself to his feet and inhaled deeply. "I haven't done that for centuries. It's more taxing than I remember. You," he pointed at the ball, "make sure you get him someone who knows what they're doing as soon as possible. I could only repair a heart and lungs, restoring blood and oxygen to the brain. He's still bleeding internally, and most of his organs are destroyed." "Me?" Boar asked. "Where are you going?" "I can't stick around here, not after what I've done here. Can't have people finding me. If he wakes up, tell him Grixax sends his regards." With that, the medic sprinted away. Boar was too startled to follow him. Later, after Tedix had been stabilized and ship cleared of swarm, Boar had gone searching for the medic. Strangely, the rebellion had no mention of Milak Wesk anywhere amongst their records. The only trace Boar could find was a single missing escape pod, jettisoned during the boarding. No one believed Boar when he told them what happened, not even Clint. At least, Boar assumed that from the grunts and silent looks. Everyone said that he had seen the things caused by the trauma of witnessing. There was no way that Milak could have reconstructed Tedix's chest, not if the Urg had smashed it. Boar had simply thought that it had been worse than it looked, but Boar knew that what he had seen. Rounding a corner, a pair nearly ran into the back of Clint Stone. He stood in the middle of a hallway, breathing heavily. Blood drenched his fists at his sides. At the sound of the footsteps, he spun, snarling. Of all the terrifying things in the universe that Boar had come across in his life, the one that scared him the most was Clint Stone, ready to kill. Before he could strike them, the light of recognition flared in his eyes, and Clint dropped his hand. Plasma claws retracting, Boar glanced around, noticing the lack of dead swarm. "Did you kill them all?" Routh asked, his voice easy. Clint gave an unintelligible grunt and shrugged. "Well, let's get back to the Hand of War then." The Hand of War was what the bandits had renamed the swarm battlecruiser. After Clint's widespread nickname, the Hand of War, or the War Fist, the source of the name was easily identified. Having cleared it of all things swarm, it was now in the middle of renovation, as the bandits made it their own. As the base of operations for the unit, Hand of War held the supplies and munitions that they had collected over the months of long engagements of the Swarm Empire. Boar was proud of the name. He had suggested it. "Wait," Clint intoned roughly. "There is one thing I have to do." That one thing was setting the reactor to power station to overload. Boar watched from the rear viewport of Susan as the station exploded. The shockwave caused the station to swell like a balloon before bursting and sending thousands of tons of material flying in all directions of space. Some would be caught in the gravity of a star and of planets at some point in the distant future, but others would continue on their lonely path until the heat death of the universe. A brief flash of light came from the flammable parts of the station, vaporized under the heat before extinguishing, having used up all the oxygen stored on board. Louth contacted the Hand of War in order to discover their current coordinates before relaying that Clint Stone would find a ship. A major advantage of the Hand of War had over the moon base of Beloria was mobility. They could be anywhere in the galaxy at any given moment, making them extremely difficult to track or locate. Word had reached the bandits about a special unit that the Swarm had created, specifically to hunt down the rebellion forces acting openly against the Empire. That unit had already dispatched the forces of Mahang system. There was little other information on them. Louth and Boar sat in the bay area of Susan as Clint flew from the cockpit. Neither was particularly eager to join him. There was just something about being in the same room as a man who killed several hundred others in the span of a few hours that did not sit well with them. Both Louth and Boar sat in silence, staring at nothing. Even for those used to the sight of slaughter and death, there was still a time needed to recover from the sights. They remained silent for the remainder of the flight, neither speaking or moving much. Boar found a cleaning kit amongst the scattered supplies in the bay and cleared a workbench. He spent nearly an hour cleaning his buried equipment. When the ship touched down in the Hand of War's hangar, he had just finished wiping down his gun. There was no one in the hangar when they disembarked. It was not an unusual sight of late. No one wanted to be around Clint. Boar did not mind. That way he didn't have to talk to anyone about what had happened. As Ball left the ramp, he turned to see Clint sitting simply in the bay, slumped across the chair staring at nothing. After a brief internal struggle, Ball walked up the ramp. "Hey Clint, why don't we grab something to eat in the mess?" After a moment, Clint turned his head and focused his eyes on Ball. Ball flinched in anticipation, ready for the baleful, rageful glare of Clint Stone on the warpath. Instead, it was like looking at a statue. Clint's face was empty, devoid of motion. It was worse that it was his eyes. Eyes once full of energy, of purpose, of life, were now flat and dull. After a moment he flicked his eyes to the side, nodding mechanically, rising, his limbs moving in much the same way as an automaton fresh off the line, stiff and rhythmless. Without meaning to, Ball grasped and shocked to see the empty shell of the Clint Stone was, disturbing to say the least. "Clint, you need help." Ball's voice came out sharp and firm, an order rather than an observation. Looking woodenly at Ball, Clint laboriously shook his head side to side. Ball scoffed at him. "You look like a living dead. You don't eat, you don't sleep. The only time you show the slightest modicum of interest, you go into a bloody rage." Clint did not react. "You won't even see your friend, who is lying in a coma after having been brought back from the dead." Clint shook his head slightly more vigorously than before. Ball took it as a good sign. Anything to remove him from the living death he was in now. TEDx had mentioned Clint entered states similar to this in the past, usually in response to trauma or emotional distress. Perhaps it was a coping method, and regardless, this had gone too far. It was time to snap him out of it. "I know it's hard. I know this reminds you of before. I know you considered Lady Night." Ball was cut short by Clint gripping him by the throat and slapping him against the wall. "Do not." Clint seethed through gritted teeth, eyes blazing murderously. "Say her name." As suddenly as he lifted Ball, Clint let him down and backed away slowly, the light fading from his eyes. "She wouldn't want you like this," Ball said, after backing up several feet. Clint looked up again, the embers flickering in his eyes. "She wouldn't want to see you the shattered remnant of your former self," Ball continued. "This hollow husk of a man who only lives to kill." "I was before," Clint growled. "See, I don't think that," Ball said, still keeping a good distance between himself and Clint. "He was being reckless, not stupid. From what I heard, you were the wrathful spirit, true. But you didn't murder mindlessly and retreat into your head afterwards. There was always something else to focus on, I think." Surely TEDx would have been easier time of this, as he had been with Clint Stone the longest of any living being. TEDx knew how Clint thought, why he did what he did, but TEDx was not here, which was the source of the problem. Ball had to make do with what he had heard from TEDx and the others. Clint started walking forward. "You can't possibly imagine what I did or what I'm doing." "Then enlighten me," Ball replied. He had him talking, and that was more response than Clint had shown in the last few weeks. Closing his eyes for a moment, Clint seemed to ponder Ball's words before his upper lip curled and his fists clenched tight. The human stood still for near a minute, his body shaking with what Ball assumed to be rage. Then his hands relaxed and Clint's face returned to a flat mask. The dead light had returned to his eyes as well. Baffled, Ball blinked and simply stared at Clint. He had been about to speak, and he had just shut down. Opening his mouth to putter again, Ball paused when the revelation struck him. What if Clint had done it on purpose? What if he had intentionally returned to the state for apathy and indifference? That possibility unnerved Ball deeply. That means that Clint's mind had not been ravaged by the trauma and made void of emotion. Instead, it was nothing but emotion, rage being the most prevalent. Clint simply forced himself to feel nothing in order to not act in that rage. The rage that allowed him to kill entire shiploads of swarm without blinking. Ball suddenly felt very glad that he had not continued to go to Clint. The rage burned so hot inside, Clint was forced to suppress all emotion and thought to keep it contained. Despite this new development, Ball still thought he needed to help Clint. He'd just have to go about it differently, and he thought that he might have just the right thing. It was time to visit the only one who could drag Clint back from the edge he was on. It was time to visit TEDx. It had never really occurred to Ball what it meant for Clint to lose TEDx. Ball understood losing a friend, even a close one. The life of a rebel was not one of peace. He thought that he'd known loss. Ball supposed that he still did, but Clint had an understanding of loss that perhaps no one in the galaxy could match. Sole survivor of his race, the last son of Earth, was his people's last chance at revenge and closure. But even a man such as Clint could not do it alone. Even a man who swam against the current needed a rock to steady himself. TEDx had been Clint's rock, and he had now been taken away. Now Clint was tumbling backwards into the abyss. After losing everything he had ever known, now his support was gone. But there was hope. TEDx was not dead. He was alive and stable, under the care of the finest doctors the rebellion had. Ball was currently standing outside of TEDx's room, watching silently as Clint sat alone with TEDx. The Jahan was hooked up to possibly every machine in the hospital and was barely visible under the tubes and monitors. From the moment they had arrived, Ball had noticed a change in Clint. Attention. It wasn't the blank, emotionless automaton that he had existed with his allies, or the mindless blood rage when facing enemies. It was a tension, a pressure, a water against a dam. that grew more pronounced the closer they got to TEDx. When they had reached the room where TEDx lay deep in his coma, Ball knew that he needed to give Clint some time alone with TEDx, and so he remained outside, the door shut. He could still hear the sobs. "That's the first time I've seen him come in here," said a voice behind Ball. He almost jumped out of his skin. Turning with more grace than he jumped, Ball found himself face to face with Bohones, the doctor in charge of the hospital. "It's the first time he's been," Ball said, clearing his throat quietly. Bohones tilted his head to the side. "Really? I would have expected him to be glued to TEDx's bedside." "There were, circumstances." Thankfully, Bohones did not press the issue further, though both of them silently watched the door close for a moment before Ball turned to Bohones and asked, "Is he going to be okay?" The doctor hesitated before answering. "I do not know. By all rights, he should be dead. It's a miracle he survived the trip here. And not only that, but the amount of trauma he suffered suggests that his chest was crushed flat. Yet his heart and lungs were intact when he arrived. I do not know what could do such a thing." Ball considered telling Bohones what he had seen, but decided that he didn't want another person looking at him like he was crazy. Still, it became utterly necessary. Ball would tell him. "But will he come out of his coma?" "I don't know. It's been nearly 3 weeks, but I can't tell you anything more than he's alive," the doctor repeated, struggling. "TEDx's mind has shut down in order to heal his body, but I don't know if his body will heal enough. The mind is a delicate thing, and the one we don't understand well. It is up to TEDx really to come back, and all I can say is that he won't get worse." The devices blinked and beeped rapidly on Bohones' belt, and the doctor glanced at it before rushing off. "I'm needed elsewhere," he called over his shoulder, hurrying down the corridor. Ball returned to the silent observation room, waiting for Clint to come to terms with the reality that he was faced with. He waited a long time before the door opened, and Clint walked out. Ball pointedly ignored the wet trails down Clint's face and damp shirt. Though Clint's face was twisted in deep sorrow, it was still an emotion, and Ball was willing to call it progress. "Is there some food nearby?" Clint asked slowly, a man waking up from a deep sleep. Ball hid his grin as he looked around. "I'm not sure, but I'm positive someone can point us in the right direction." There was something comforting about the darkness, not the shadowy darkness of the deep forest or the cast by imposing structures with the light of the moon, not the cold darkness of space and the harsh darkness of the extinguished fire, but the welcoming darkness of home. In the long hours before the dawn, the warm darkness of sleep, the soft darkness of a midsummer's night, is spent beneath the sky, and that was the darkness I found myself in. I floated in it, melded with it, was it. The dark was home, and a home was the dark. Here I had no worries, no memory, no pain. I simply existed in an idea, not even as a solid being or conscious. If I truly tried, I think I could have pulled myself together into a whole, but I preferred to float, drifting in the darkness. It was comfortable. Time did not hold any meaning in the dark, so after a lifetime, after a millennia, after a second, I felt a tug. It was not that hard, violent tug of a fisherman and his prey, but the soft tug of a child seeking the comfort of their parents' arms, yet not wishing to disturb them. The tugging grew slowly in intensity, pulling on a whole of my being, dispersing through the darkness. Perhaps it was simply pulling on the darkness and I was being dragged with it. But no, the darkness came and thinned as the tugging became stronger. I struggled then, pulling back against the tugging, wishing to return to my darkness, my home. But the tugging could not be stopped. As the tugging continued, memory became a flash against my being. A small Jahan cub being carried by his father. Gentle words whispered in his ear. A Jahan youth, running for his life in the streets, fleeing those who would do him harm. There was a beautiful female Jahan, one who made the Jahan smile and his heart race with a look. The Jahan on his knees, tears on his face, as she left him for the last time. Chains, restricting the Jahan and tried to escape, his broken leg howling. A human, bound in chains of the body, the same human, his soul untouched by the chains. Epic traverses across the breadth of the sky, dangers met and bested. Visions of battle and conflict, overwhelmed by memories, glowing intensely amongst the rest, a band of brothers who were more than brothers. I remembered a metal floor and a burning chest. I remembered a crashing force. And then nothing. The darkness came after, but the darkness became faint. Laced through with a light and noise, I struggled feebly, fighting to return to that darkness, that comfort. But it was denied me, vanishing before my grasp. I felt my body solid and whole, a small vessel viewed against the darkness, but a familiar one. The touch, then the memory, then the idea of the darkness passed from my mind, and I swiftly as I'd been pulled from it, and I returned to my body in full. I opened my eyes. End of chapter. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider subscribing. If you wish to support the author, there is a link to the original story, so pop over there and give him your support. If you wish to support this channel, however, there are a few ways to do so. The best and easiest would be to share this video with other people, as well as liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. All of these things tell the algorithm that this channel is at least vaguely interesting, and that may share it with other people. If you wish to support the channel in some other manner, watching my other videos would also help tremendously. Or, if you really like, there is a link down below to leave a tip or to join the Patreon. Any and all support is very much appreciated. And I hope that you all have a good one until the next time, and I'll see you then. Cheers.